So it's 15 minutes before my third and final interview for this 170K remote job. I'm sitting at my desk, rehearsing my star stories, when boom, my internet cuts out. I panic, I scramble, I'm emailing from my phone, trying to make it work, but nothing is loading. I grab my laptop, hop in my car, and drive to the nearest building with Wi-Fi. But I'm late. I'm 7 minutes behind schedule. In the chaos of that moment, I was thinking to myself, how can I make the best of this really crazy last-minute situation? So here's the story about how one minor mishap changed everything for me in this interview process. And honestly, even the way the job came about is a funny story on its own. So it all started when I got an email from a well-known big tech company. Let's call it Letter. I searched in my inbox to see when I'd applied to Letter and the role specifically to help me prepare for the interview, but I couldn't find anything. I even logged into Letter's portal and still found nothing. I realized something wasn't right. I emailed the recruiter to confirm that I was happy to interview at Letter, but that's when I finally figured out what was going on. So it turns out that the role was not for Letter. I'd applied to a large real estate company, closely partnered with them. But throughout the process, I'd been addressing the real estate company as Letter. I didn't realize my mistake at first, and yeah, it was totally embarrassing. But with 100 job applications a week, it was tough to keep track of every single detail. So the real estate company used the same email ID as Letter employees, that is username at letter.com. It wasn't until the interview process that I found out that they were actually deeply embedded into Letter's ecosystem. They ran Letter's real estate projects globally. They wanted to hire me as a program/product lead to help them build a content management system. Now, this job was not a huge stress for me because I had a lot of experience with content systems from my previous e-commerce startups. I was familiar with content management systems like OpenCart, WordPress, Magento, etc. Even the learning management system at my job at the time was also a content system, and I was very familiar with it. I knew the problem they were trying to solve, and I felt very confident that I could solve it. I had an intense first conversation with the leader who was hiring for the role. He was a very strong leader with over 15 years of experience. Even though he wasn't an expert in content systems, I knew I couldn't BS him. But I really made a strong impression, and he let me know even after the first interview that he really liked me, and he set up a second call where things got a bit more technical. He brought a PM to the second interview to ask me more tactical and strategic questions about content system. She asked me tough questions about content metadata, cataloging, categorizing, and search. Basically everything I need to know to function properly in this role. But I answered the questions well, and the conversation went smoothly. So by the end of the second interview, the role had narrowed down to just me and one other candidate. Now, here's where things started to get a little crazy. See, because the role would involve working closely with teams at Letter, he pulled me aside and laid out the plan. He said to me, Juwan, if you're hired for this role, you need to work closely with our partners at Letter. So I want you to talk to the leaders there, and if they like you, it's gonna be a go. That final conversation was key because those leaders would ultimately make the final decision on the hire. And I felt very confident. I felt like the hardest part was behind me, and this was just a chance for me to just show up, be myself, and really let my personality shine through, and I figured I'd be fine. But on the final day of the interview, disaster struck. As I mentioned, 15 minutes before the interview was supposed to start, I lost my internet connection. And to make matters worse, my apartment had poor cell service, which meant I couldn't really use my phone hotspot. I was completely thrown off guard. I emailed the company to explain the issue and let them know I'd figure it out. After trying to reboot and troubleshoot without any luck, I quickly hopped in my car and drove down the street where I could get cell service to join the call using the hotspot. But when I got comfortable, I figured it didn't make any sense to do a final video interview in my car. I drove back to my apartment office where the somehow had internet. I grabbed one of the meeting rooms to get comfortable and take this meeting. Unfortunately, by the time I was all set, I was already about 7 minutes late to the interview because of everything going on. When I finally connected, they asked me a strange question about if stuff like this typically happened. And it was just a weird vibe all through. I felt like the energy was off. I could tell the interview wasn't going as smoothly as, the two had before. But the interview still went on. However, I felt like something significant had shifted. So afterward, I didn't hear back right away, which was unusual because normally after the previous interviews, I get a response in 2 or 3 days. But this time it took well over a week. And when I finally heard back, it was a generic email saying they decided to move forward with the other candidate. It was tough, especially since this role was the role that I really, really wanted at the time because it gave me remote flexibility and they were paying a lot more money. I'd also made a good impression and felt like I was a good fit. But thinking about it now, if I could have done something differently, I probably could have asked to reschedule. At the time, it felt a little crazy to ask to reschedule 15 minutes before the scheduled interview, but I think it might have been the better play overall looking back. What would you have done if it was you in this situation? Let me know in the comment section below. But this was the lesson I took away. See, you can do everything right, have a great interview, and still not get the job. Sometimes things just don't work out. My other takeaway was maybe if I nailed the final interview, I still might not have gotten the job because the other candidate might just have had a way better overall interview than I did. Sometimes circumstances just don't line up. But you know what? I didn't let it get to me. Less than a week later, I ended up landing my dream job at Apple, which is proof that sometimes when one door closes, another one opens up. So if you're in the middle of a job search, stay positive, stay motivated. If it's meant to be, it's gonna be yours. And if you're curious about my story landing my job at Apple, check out my other video about how that happened, and I'll see you in my next video. Peace.